Hi, I just wanted to point out quickly thanks to Sarah Lou, or is it Sarah Thomas on my Substack? I think she's either Sarah Lou or Sarah Thomas. She put a message out on Substack or something and highlighting about the fact that the Telegraph had pointed out about how there's the CPS, in the Letby case, the police, when they didn't allow when they wrote to Professor Hutton, sent her an email saying that she was no longer needed. They didn't want her to use her advice about the statistics. The CPS, they said that the CPS had told them to, disengage with her as such. And but then the Telegraph reported that the CPS are claiming that they didn't do that, right? Well, they didn't stop it. It wasn't them, right? Well, that's interesting because, I would say that it's very likely was the CPS, simply because in high-profile investigations, the CPS always interfere. They tell the police just do as they're told. And actually, not just in high-profile, pretty much, it's not unusual for the CPS to interfere. They've interfered in a relatively minor case that I was involved in. That was a civil case, but they were interfering then. They interfere. They tell the police what to do, right? And so I think it's almost very likely that the CPS did interfere, and it didn't come from the police. The police would have deferred to the CPS. The question is now would be, because this would be a serious procedural error, and if it can be proven by the defence, in other words, if there's a record there of the CPS instructing the police, if they did it in writing. Because if there was procedural errors, then there's no, then she didn't have a fair trial. She didn't have a fair trial. There's no fair trial, so that interferes with having a fair trial. So it can definitely use, and it's I think it's Article 6 of the Human Rights Act. I forget which. I think it's Article 6, Human Rights. Yeah, right to a fair trial. Anyway, she didn't get that. But we know that anyway. But, if they didn't put it in writing, then did it without a record, off the record, in which case, well, they did know they were doing wrong, so it's be off the record, in which case it's got to be proven then, hasn't it? And that they were interfering. But that would be that's a serious procedural error. I think even if it was the police, the fact that, if the CPS are lying, right, and it was the police, if the CPS are lying, if the CPS were telling the truth, and in fact it was the police who made that decision and they weren't interfered with by the CPS, then the police have lied, haven't they, to Bolger, the police has lied to Professor, because the police could always argue, oh, well, we didn't really understand the significance, blah, 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 or whatever, we didn't think that it was blah, blah. The CPS shouldn't be interfering, so that's a serious procedural error. And that could be used on the appeal, for Lucy, as in, it doesn't go as far as a legal error as such, because that would be something like the CPS withholding evidence itself, which they've probably done. Let's face it, just about every code and law and God knows what else has been broken in the book in Lucy's case, but it's proving it, isn't it? So the interference and stuff like that, but it's procedural errors are still procedural errors, and that can still be used as an argument on appeal, and to help Lucy's case on appeal, if that can be proven that the CPS, if there's a record there of them telling the police to let Professor James Hutton, statistical evidence, to let that go and not use that, and eventually to let it go to trial without, in a way which would have been misrepresenting the case, because obviously it's very important that the statistical evidence was presented properly in front of the jury, and it wasn't, and then Professor Hutton had been listened to and allowed to input, and that chart that they did and the way they presented it would have had to have been done differently. In fact, the case may never have even, actually, it may have been thrown out and may not even reach court at all, because it was no case to answer, wasn't it? That's what Ben Myers was trying to go to, and there was no case to answer, and with that, with Hutton's input, so that could have had a massive effect. So that would, so the CCRC, hopefully, I mean, Mark McDonald will be putting that forward to the CCRC. We don't know what he's put forward to the CCRC. Whether he's got that evidence, whether he can get hold of that evidence, you know, they're probably, as I say, they're denying it, so unless there's a record there. And the other thing quickly that I just thought of was that in the CCRC itself, there was a guy called Sean Edwards, who was, he was a Detective Superintendent Sean Edwards, who was leading the investigation. Well, he was one of the lead investigators at the CCRC into Letby case, and they had to let him go. And they let him go because he was an award, you know, he praised Paul Hughes at an award ceremony about the Lucy case and everything, that Letby case, and he praised Paul Hughes and the Cheshire Constabulary at an award ceremony. So, you know, he was sort of compromised, I thought, so they had to let him go because he did that back in 2024. But the thing is, you know, he praised Operation Hummingbird and then he was on the case, but they let him go, but they only let him go after, I think, a report in The Sun about it. So they knew about it anyway, but the only reason they let him go was because it was then highlighted in the press. So just shows that do the CCRC have any real interest in doing a real, proper, fair look at this case? And so, well, you know, again, he's gone now, but I mean, you have to wonder who else is in the CCRC is, you know, not really, you know, is biased, basically, we don't know. For whatever reason, or compromised for whatever reason. You know, look, I mean, yeah, it is taking a long time. Yeah, there is a queue, but they could, you know, ultimately, they've had enough time now. There is so much, you know, there's fresh evidence, isn't there, with the stuff around the insulin, there's lots of stuff which has been put forward, no doubt already, what Mark McDonald has put to the CCRC. They're still delaying, and you could say, well, they've got a queue, blah, 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 but as I've said many times before and pointed out, is that they, in a case that's high profile, they can use public interest to jump the queue and make that case faster. And this is an easy case for them to use public interest because it's massively public interest, because it's involved with high profile media, very huge amount of people involved, MPs, and also because of the NHS involvement and the fact it affects the NHS, it affects people who've been trusting becoming a nurse, quite frankly, and the way that it affects trust in all the institutions, the police, the legal system itself. So absolutely, there's public interest involved. They could hurry this up as much as they want. I don't buy that they need any more time anymore. This is ridiculous. They've had enough time now, and they're just dragging their feet. There's no excuse for this, right? They should have people on that 24/7 now. You know, it's ludicrous that they're still dragging their feet over this. I mean, the fact that the thermal inquiry can't, you know, she can't. Her report would be ridiculous, isn't it? There's no point. And also the inquests, you know, the inquests are being delayed again and again. Everything's delayed because they know that the whole thing just looks stupid until Lucy gets, you know, gets an appeal. You know, she needs an appeal, and this is really frustrating now. You know, it's like they're just putting two fingers up to everybody. Let's just like, well, we don't care. You know, we know that you all know that there's been a miscarriage of justice, but guess what? Two fingers up. We don't give a whatever. That's their attitude now, isn't it? Because they, you know, let's face it, anyone and his dog could see that this is a problem. There's multiple lines on which Lucy didn't have a fair trial. I don't care even whether you talk, but legally, but also, you know, just from a human level. You know, I mean, there's the spirit of the law and there's the letter of the law. And unfortunately, we have a system which too often goes by the letter of the law. But there is something called the spirit of the law, and judges are supposed to take note of the spirit of the law too, okay? And, you know, so it doesn't matter, as far as I'm concerned, the letter's irrelevant, although it has to be brought into it. You know, this whole thing about the new having to have new evidence as well is another thing that's letter of law. Because if there's evidence that in the original trial that that the lawyer wasn't, for instance, didn't do their job properly, that's not the client's fault, that's not the convicted person's fault, that their lawyer did not bring in this, that and the other, and then to deny them appeal because their lawyer didn't argue this or didn't do what they should have done, again, is really, it's not justice, is it? So, yeah, so the spirit of the law to me is far more important than the letter of the law, because you want justice. You don't care about this dotted I or that crossed T. People care about it being fair. Well, I say people, I hate it when other people say people care about this and people care, because when the media do that, people care about this, people care, people, it's always, you know, and I'm always like, what people are you talking about? Okay, because I don't, you know, and it's, yeah, so the people care, but let's face it, there's a lot of people who publicly care about this case, and they've said they care about this case, and that's not just Lucy's families and friends and all the people that were involved in the actual, you know, the medical people and the et cetera, but it's a huge amount of random people who just have spoken out. So it's about time they bloody listened, and it is getting really frustration because having to people repeating themselves over and over again while they drag their feet. Enough is enough.